I never thought the end of my patience, my silence, my generosity would begin at a family barbecue. But there I was, gasping for breath, clawing at the surface of a cold lake, while my grandson Mason stood on the dock laughing. 19 years old, tall and athletic, with that charming smile everyone praised. Except now, his smile didn't reach his eyes. There was nothing charming in what he did. "Come on, Grandma," he shouted. "Let's see if you can still swim." Before I could react, his hands shoved me hard. My feet left the wooden dock, my body twisted, and the scream at my throat never made it out. The water hit me like a brick wall. My chest seized from the shock. I hadn't swum in over 30 years, not since my shoulder surgery, and I had strict instructions not to risk it again. No one moved, not my son Scott, not his wife Melinda, who just sipped her wine and rolled her eyes. No one flinched. I thrashed, coughing, my arms fighting water and weakness. When I managed to surface, sputtering, I heard them laughing. Mason stood with his arms crossed, grinning like it was a joke. Melinda muttered, "She's being dramatic." I don't remember how I got out. Instinct, maybe. Survival. But I'll never forget what Mason said when I dragged myself, soaked and trembling, onto the dock. "Guess you can still swim after all, Grandma, tough old bird." And they laughed, all of them. That was the moment the curtain lifted. The moment I stopped making excuses. The moment I finally saw them for who they really were, not family, but witnesses to my drowning, who chose not to help. That was the day something in me began to wake up. Mason didn't always laugh like that. Once upon a time, he was the little boy who brought me wildflowers from the backyard, holding them out with chubby hands and a crooked grin. I was his favorite person, or at least that's what he used to say. His parents, Scott and Melinda, were always in and out of stability. When Mason was 5, Scott lost his job again. The mortgage was slipping, their marriage was cracking, and in the middle of it all stood a child who needed structure, food, safety. So I took him in. It was only supposed to be for a few months, they said. Those months turned into years. I became more than a grandmother. I was the one who made his school lunches, taught him to tie his shoes, sat by his bed through fevered nights. I paid for his speech therapy, his piano lessons, his orthodontics. When his asthma got worse, I was the one rushing to urgent care with his little hand clutched tight in mine. They moved into my lake house during a summer when their apartment lease fell through. I told them they could stay until things improved. That was 8 summers ago. They never paid rent. They never offered. I didn't ask. I told myself it was love. That's what family does. We don't keep score. We give because we care. But love, real love, has boundaries. And somewhere between the scraped knees and late-night grocery runs, mine disappeared. I remember when Mason turned 13 and I gave him a used keyboard I'd bought secondhand. He hugged me so hard, I nearly fell over and said, "This is better than Christmas." I believed deep in my soul that he would grow up to be kind, thoughtful, grateful. But gratitude fades when entitlement creeps in, and no one taught him to stop it, not Scott, who always blamed circumstances, not Melinda, who rolled her eyes when I reminded Mason to say thank you. They let it slide, over and over, until what I'd raised with tenderness was slowly reshaped by their coldness. Looking back now, I see it clearly. I wasn't just being generous. I was being erased one favor, one loan, one silent sacrifice at a time. And the lake, that was just the first time they did it in public. When I finally pulled myself out of the water, my hands scraped raw against the edge of the dock. My breath came in painful gasps, and my legs trembled so hard I thought they might give out completely. No one helped me up, not Scott, not Melinda, not Mason. They just stood there, watching. Mason chuckled and said, "Tough old bird, knew you could handle it." The others laughed like he'd just delivered a punchline. That sound, sharp, dismissive, echoed louder in my ears than the water I'd swallowed. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just stood up soaking wet, cardigan clinging to my spine, and walked toward the picnic table like a ghost moving through the living. They went back to flipping burgers, uncorking another bottle of wine, chatting about summer flights to Cancun. Not one of them offered me a towel. Not one asked if I was okay. I sat down on the wooden bench, my hands still shaking, water dripping into my shoes. My chest burned, not from the cold anymore, but from something deeper: humiliation, disbelief. And then, in that stillness, I heard my best friend June's voice in my head. Clear as day, people show their true colors when they think you need them. They thought I needed them. They thought I had nowhere else to go, that my usefulness, my home, my money, my care meant I'd never push back. But something shifted in me that afternoon. I stopped looking at them like my family and started seeing them for what they'd become: opportunists wearing familiar faces. I saw Mason not as the boy who used to fall asleep on my lap, but as the young man laughing at my pain. I saw Scott and Melinda not as my struggling children, but as adults who had decided long ago that my presence was convenient, but never valued. That was the moment the curtain lifted. And what lay behind it was the start of something I hadn't felt in years: resolve. That night, long after the barbecue ended and the wine glasses clinked behind closed doors, I sat alone in my bedroom. My hair was still damp. My knees ached. The scrape on my elbow throbbed. But what hurt most couldn't be bandaged. I reached into the nightstand and pulled out my old leather journal. I hadn't written in it in years. Cliff, my late husband, used to tease me that it was my second brain. I opened to a fresh page and wrote just one sentence: "They will never get the chance to drown me again." The next morning, I began watching, not with sadness, but with precision. I started small. I let my hands tremble a little when I poured tea. I paused in the middle of conversations like I'd forgotten where I was going. I fumbled with the TV remote, deliberately choosing the wrong buttons. The change in them was instant. Scott began whispering behind closed doors. "She's getting worse." Melinda muttered things like, "We should really talk about long-term options." And Mason, he stopped greeting me altogether. He'd walk past me in the kitchen, eyes on his phone, not even pretending anymore. But I wasn't confused. I was testing them. I kept notes in the journal columns titled, "Who Notices and Who Avoids." After the lake, I had no more illusions. I wasn't searching for kindness. I was gathering evidence. They thought I was slipping, but I was sharper than ever. And the more they showed their indifference, the more certain I became. The only thing fragile in this house was their facades. They believed they were playing a quiet game of removal. They didn't realize I had started a quiet game of my own, and I always played the long game better than any of them. The next morning, there was a knock at the kitchen door. Not the front, never the front. June had always used the side entrance, like family. "Open up, Carolyn. I brought muffins and opinions." There she was, oversized sunglasses, turquoise windbreaker, and a paper bag clutched in one hand like she was storming a battlefield. Before I could say a word, she pressed a coffee cup into my hand. "You look like hell," she said, not unkindly. "Sit, I'll pour." I sat. "Because with June, you don't argue, receive." "They did something, didn't they?" she asked. I nodded once. Once. She didn't gasp. She didn't pat my hand like some pitying neighbor. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, and said, "Then it's time." "Time for what?" I asked. From her bag, she pulled out a folder. Not a muffin, not a napkin. A folder. "My lawyer's card," she said, "and a list of every account you mentioned last year when we went over your taxes." I stared at her. "You kept that?" "I keep everything," she said flatly. "Especially when my best friend is handing out her love and legacy like Halloween candy to people who'd shove her into a lake." I looked down at the business card. Nathan Collier, estate law. Neat Sarah Funt, no nonsense, just like June. "I don't know," I said softly. "It feels final." "You don't want final," she said. "You want freedom, that's different." She wasn't wrong. I didn't want to lash out or shout. I just wanted peace, the kind that comes when you finally stop begging to be seen. And for the first time in years, I felt like someone actually saw me. Not as grandma, not as a burden, but as Carolyn Reese. A woman with choices still in her pocket. In the days that followed, things shifted, but not in the way most people would hope. There was no apology, no sudden warmth, no attempt to make things right. Instead, the whispers grew louder. I would catch Scott in the kitchen, murmuring to Melinda behind a half-closed door. "She's slipping," he said one night. "I don't think she's taking her medication." Melinda, always efficient with a passive-aggressive smile, replied, "We need to start looking into facilities, sooner rather than later." Facilities. They said it like it was logistics, like I was furniture that needed storage. One afternoon, I overheard Mason telling a friend on the phone, "She's just taking up space now. I mean, she forgets things all the time." It's sad, really. I never forgot a thing. I double-checked the stove every night, balanced every ledger in my sock drawer down to the last penny. But I didn't argue. Let them build their case. Let them believe I was fading. Because I wanted to see how far they would go when they thought I couldn't push back. The hardest part wasn't their cruelty. It was how casual it had become. The way Scott walked past me with his coffee like I wasn't there. The way Melinda referred to me in the third person, even when I was in the room. "She left the lights on again," she said one evening. "It's not safe, Scott. What if Mason was home alone?" I was always home alone, and no one ever worried about me. So I stayed quiet. I stayed small. Because soon, I wouldn't just walk away quietly. I would leave in a way they would never forget, and they'd have no one to blame but themselves. It was Melinda's idea, a casual dinner party for her yoga friends and Scott's work colleagues. "So nothing fancy," she said. "Just something light. Maybe you can make that lemon cake they all like?" I said nothing. I baked the cake anyway. Out of habit, maybe out of sentiment. The house filled with the scent of grilled meat and oversprayed perfume. Laughter rolled in from the patio like a tide I no longer belonged to. I stayed in the kitchen, quiet, out of view. Then I heard Mason's voice. "So get this," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Grandma fell into the lake at our last barbecue. She was flailing around like a flipped turtle, going, "Help me, help me." Laughter, real, cruel, belly-deep laughter. I told her, "You're not even drowning," Mason continued. "She was just fishing for sympathy. You know how old people are, always weaponizing helplessness." Someone muttered, "That's dark." Mason laughed harder. "She's fine, tough old bird." Tough old bird. That was what I was now. When? Not the woman who bathed him as a toddler, who sold jewelry to pay for his braces, who saved every crayon drawing in a folder under her bed. Just a bird. I stood behind the sliding glass door, my hands trembling not from age, but from rage. And then Melinda's voice, calm and cutting. "She's a liability. Not family." I told Scott we need to think about the future, not sentiment. I turned away. No words, no tears. Just one decision. It was time. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't shout or pack in a fury. I opened my bedside drawer and took out the card June had given me weeks earlier. "Nathan Collier, Estate Law. I dialed the number. He answered on the second ring. "This is Nathan." "It's Carolyn Reese," I said. "I'm ready." He didn't ask what I meant. He just said, "Come in tomorrow, bring your documents, bring your ID." "I already have," I replied. The next afternoon, I sat across from him in a small, quiet office. I handed over the original trust paperwork Cliff and I created years ago, along with a folded letter outlining the $50,000 university fund I had been setting aside for Mason since he was 10. "Do you want to close the account?" Nathan asked. "Redirect the funds. Name a new beneficiary." I looked at the ceiling for a moment before whispering yes, but not to another relative. He waited. "I want it donated." I said to a foundation for first-generation college students, anonymous in memory of Clifford Reese. He nodded once, then carefully sealed the documents. "It will be handled discreetly. That fund used to be a gift. Now it was a statement, and the message was simple. You do not mock the hands that built you and expect them to keep giving. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to scream. I just had to sign. And once the ink dried, so did any obligation I had left to them. I chose Sunday morning, quiet, unnoticed, while the house slept. I packed a small suitcase, 3 sweaters, my gardening gloves, Cliff's old flannel shirt, and a single photo of me holding baby Mason. Just one. The valuables were already gone. The important documents had been secured weeks earlier. What I left behind were things they never valued. Holiday cards in my handwriting, kitchen tools no one cleaned, and furniture worn from years of my care. I didn't say goodbye. Friday evening, as I stood in the kitchen doorway, I spoke casually. June's taking a little road trip. She asked me to come along. Scott didn't look up from his phone. Cool. Mason brushed past me on the way to the fridge. Whatever. Melinda, folding laundry, said, Drive safe, as if she were more concerned about color sorting than my leaving. Not one of them asked where I was going. Not one offered to carry my bag. They didn't even pretend. That told me everything I needed to know. To them, I was already shelved, already categorized as old, fading, irrelevant. They were just waiting for the reading of a will I would never let them see. Saturday night, I barely slept. I watched the walls, the same ones that used to echo with Mason's laughter in Cliffs of the Ring, and realized they felt colder now. Hollow. At 5:30 a.m., I rose, brushed my hair, folded my blanket, and left my bedroom like I was slipping between worlds. At 6 sharp, June pulled up. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. As the car rolled away and the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror, I whispered to myself, to let them wonder where I went. This time, they don't get to follow Dot. 2 days after arriving at Silver Pines, I sat at a simple desk in my new room. Outside the window, birds argued over a hanging feeder, and the air smelled like lavender and earth. I pulled out my journal and tore out a clean page. At the top, I wrote 3 names: Scott Reese, Melinda Reese, Mason Reese. No dear, no sentiment, just facts. I was the one who stayed up when Mason couldn't sleep. I was the one who paid for school, for shoes, for birthdays you forgot. I was the one who waited for respect, for thanks, for love, that never came back the same way it was given. I wrote with steady hands, no tears, no shaking voice. Then came the truth they feared most. The university fund is gone, redirected to students who still know how to say thank you. There will be no inheritance. You do not inherit what you missed, Reese. Then finally, being alone is better than being used. I signed it not as Mom or Grandma, but with my full name. Carolyn May Reese. A name they had forgotten belonged to a woman. I folded the letter, sealed it in an envelope with no return address, and walked to the post office down the street. The clerk smiled and said, "First class." "Yes," I said, placing it on the counter. "Let's make sure they feel it." And I didn't look back, because I wasn't sending guilt. I was delivering closure. It took 5 days. 5 days from the moment my letter landed on their kitchen table to the first ripple of panic. Nathan called me with a chuckle in his voice. They came to the office in a rush. Scott looked 10 years older. Melinda didn't say a word. Mason, he was pale. They thought it was a joke or a threat until the documents followed. The fund gone. The estate restructured. The access cut. The silence final. Mason reportedly stormed out of the bank when the scholarship office confirmed the funds had been donated. Melinda called my cell 3 times. She didn't know I hadn't brought it with me. Then they tried contacting Nathan again, tried reporting me missing, but I wasn't missing. I had simply withdrawn like an investor pulling out of a bad deal. And as the days passed, their faces began to show the truth. Not sadness, not guilt, but fear. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing what I had given for so long. I had been the quiet anchor beneath their feet. Now without me, they were drifting. And I wasn't there to pull them back, because I had finally chosen myself. At Silver Pines, I started waking up early, not because I had chores or people to serve, but because I wanted to. I tended the shared garden with neighbors who said, "Please," and "Thank you." I read novels on a sunlit bench. I played chess with a retired teacher who never once made me feel small. No one here asked me what I could give. They simply welcomed who I already was. One afternoon, June called, words getting around. She said, "Apparently, Mason dropped out. Scott's drinking again. Melinda's been telling people you lost your mind." I laughed. Let them. Because for the first time in decades, the distance between us was honest. They didn't lose me, they pushed me out. And now that I'm gone, they're finally listening to an echo, an absence, a boundary they thought I'd never set. But I'm not angry anymore. I'm not trying to be remembered. I'm just living. And when people ask where I went, what happened, why I disappeared, I simply smile and say, I didn't disappear. I just stopped being convenient. So if you've ever been the quiet one, the giver, the forgotten, let this be your sign. You don't owe them your fire. You owe yourself peace.